He shouldn't have started digging, but the dog wouldn't stop, and sometimes, when a German Shepherd refuses to be silent, it means something is already too late to ignore. The night air in rural Montana sat heavy and cold, just above 40 degrees, the kind that crept through flannel and settled in a bone, while the wind dragged slowly through the pine trees like a whisper that didn't want to be heard, and under a pale slice of moonlight, Daniel Hayes stood barefoot in the damp dirt behind his cabin, his breath shallow, his hands shaking as he drove a rusted shovel into the ground again and again, each strike dull, each scoop heavier than the last, because behind him, Rex was barking, not loud, not wild, but sharp, deliberate, like a metronome counting down something unseen, and Daniel could feel it now, that pressure in the air, that wrongness like the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to understand what the dog had already known for days. The soil here wasn't right, too loose in some places, too packed in others, like it had been disturbed and then forgotten, and every time Daniel paused, just for a second, Rex would bark again, one single command that cut through the silence and left no room for doubt, and it pulled him forward, forced his hands back to the shovel, deeper, faster, until the metal edge struck something that wasn't rock and wasn't wood, something softer, something that made the sound change just enough to stop. His heart mid-beat. He froze, the handle still gripped tight in his calloused palms, and for a moment, the only thing he could hear was the wind slipping through the trees and the low, steady growl building in Rex's chest. Not fear, never fear, but certainty, and Daniel swallowed hard, dropping to his knees in the dirt, brushing away the loose soil with his bare hands, fingertips numb from cold and something else he didn't want to name, until a shape began to form beneath the surface, a shape that didn't belong to the earth, a shape that shouldn't have been there at all. Rex stepped closer, his amber eyes locked on the ground, body rigid, every muscle drawn tight with purpose. And when Daniel finally leaned back on his heels, staring down at what he had uncovered, the world seemed to narrow into a single, silent realization that hit harder than any memory he carried from war. Because this hadn't started tonight. It hadn't started with the digging. It hadn't even started with the barking. It had started 5 nights ago, at exactly 2:17 a.m., when Rex first broke the silence, and Daniel, exhausted and stubborn, had made the worst mistake a Marine could make. He ignored the one partner who had never been wrong. 5 nights earlier, the house had still felt like a place you could breathe in, a place where silence meant rest instead of warning. And Daniel Hayes had been sitting at the edge of his bed with his boots half unlaced, the soft hum of an old floor heater filling the room, while the clock on the wall crept toward 2:17 a.m., its second hand ticking with a steady patience that usually calmed him, but not that night. Not when Rex suddenly lifted his head from the rug and froze, ears forward, body still as if something invisible had just stepped into the room without making a sound. And then came the bark, sharp and singular, cutting through the quiet like a signal flare in the dark, not frantic, not confused, but precise, intentional, as if the dog was pointing at something Daniel could not yet see. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face, telling himself it was nothing more than a passing noise outside, maybe a deer brushing against the fence line or a loose branch tapping against the siding. Because out here, miles from the nearest town, the night carried sounds that could twist the mind if you let them, and he had learned long ago not to let them, not after everything he had already carried home with him. So he stood, stepped into his boots, and walked to the back door, Rex. Already ahead of him, pacing, not wild but focused, like he was tracking something just beyond reach. The porch light flicked on with a dull click, casting a weak yellow glow across the yard, stretching long shadows over the uneven ground, and the cold air hit Daniel's face as he opened the door, crisp and dry, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. And for a moment, everything looked normal, the tree line still, the old fence quiet, the distant hills swallowed by darkness. But Rex did not relax, did not hesitate. He stepped forward onto the porch and barked again, this time lower, more urgent, his gaze locked on a single point beyond the edge of the light where the yard faded into shadow. Daniel followed that line with his eyes, squinting, trying to force shapes out of the dark. But there was nothing there, nothing he could name, Nothing he could justify losing sleep over, and yet the dog remained fixed, muscles tight, tail rigid, as if whatever he sensed had weight, had presence, and Daniel felt a flicker of something he had not allowed himself in a long time. Not fear exactly, but recognition. The kind that whispered that he had seen this before, in another place under different skies, when silence never meant safety and the smallest signal could mean everything. He shook it off, forcing a short breath, placing a firm hand on Rex's collar, grounding both of them in the moment, and gave a quiet command to settle, to stand down, because that was what you did. You controlled the situation. You did not let it control you. And for a second, Rex obeyed, his body easing just enough to suggest compliance. But his eyes never left that dark stretch of yard, never blinked, never softened. And when Daniel finally led him back inside, closing the door against the cold, the silence returned, but it was no longer the same. It felt thinner somehow, like something had slipped through with them, something that did not belong. And as Daniel lay back down, staring at the ceiling while the clock ticked past 2:20, he told himself it was over, that it was nothing, that the dog would forget by morning. But in the next room, Rex remained awake, sitting upright in the dark, listening, waiting, as if the night had spoken once, and he was the only one who understood what it said. The second night came quieter, but it did not come alone. It carried memory with it, and at exactly 2:17 a.m., before the clock could even finish its slow climb into the minute, Rex was already awake, already sitting upright in the dark like a sentry who had never stood down. And when the bark came this time, it was sharper, closer, not louder, but heavier somehow, like it carried weight that had not been there before. And Daniel felt it. Before he fully woke, that same pressure in his chest, that same pull that did not belong to sleep or to reason, and he lay there for a moment staring into the dark, listening as the sound echoed through the house. Once, then again, spaced with intention, never frantic, always deliberate. He pushed himself up, the floor cold under his bare feet, and this time he did not sigh, did not dismiss it as easily, because something in the rhythm had changed, something that reminded him of patterns he had been trained never to ignore, and Rex was already at the back door again. Not pacing, not whining, just waiting, as if the decision had already been made and Daniel was the one catching up. The porch light flickered on slower than before, casting the same pale glow across the yard. But the shadows seemed longer now, stretched thinner across the ground like they were reaching towards something unseen, and the air carried a different scent, faint but unmistakable. Damp soil turned over recently, the kind of smell that did not belong to untouched ground. And Daniel stepped out farther this time, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth as he moved past the porch, past the line where light faded into gray. Rex moved ahead of him, 10 feet, then 15, stopping only when he reached the same invisible boundary as the night before, his body locking into place, head low, ears forward, and then he did something he had not done before. He lowered his muzzle toward the ground and inhaled slowly, deeply, like he was confirming something he already knew. Daniel followed, slower now, more cautious, his eyes scanning the ground, the tree line, the empty stretch of yard that should have felt familiar, but no longer did. And when he reached Rex's side, he noticed it, subtle at first, easy to miss if you were not looking for it, a slight depression in the soil, uneven, not quite natural, like the earth had been disturbed and then pressed back into place without care, and he crouched down, brushing his fingers lightly over the surface, feeling the difference, the looseness beneath the thin crust, and a quiet thought formed in his mind, one he did not want to follow but could not ignore. Rex let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, something in between, something that vibrated with urgency, and Daniel felt his pulse pick up, not from fear but from recognition, because this was not random, this was not instinct without purpose, this was a signal, and he had been trained his whole life to read signals, to trust the ones that did not make sense until they did. He straightened slowly, stepping back, forcing a breath, telling himself it could still be nothing, that the ground shifts, that animals dig, that the mind fills in gaps when it is tired. And yet as he turned toward the house, Rex did not follow. He stayed, standing over that same patch of earth, eyes fixed, unmoving, as if leaving it now would mean abandoning something that mattered. And Daniel hesitated at the edge of the porch light, looking back one more time, the cold biting deeper into his skin, the silence heavier than before. And for the first time, he did not call the dog in right away, because something inside him had started to listen, not fully, not yet, but enough to know that whatever was out there had not gone away. It had only been waiting for him to notice. By the third night, the silence inside the house no longer felt like rest. It felt like something waiting to be broken. And Daniel did not even pretend to sleep this time. He lay on his back fully awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the seconds as the clock crept toward 2:17 a.m., his body already tense, already braced for the sound he knew was coming. And when it did, Rex did not bark right away, not this time. Instead, there was a low, steady rumble from his chest, a warning that came. Before the signal, like thunder rolling in before a storm, and Daniel felt in his bones before he heard it with his ears that something had shifted, something had moved closer. Then the bark came, sharper than the nights before, followed immediately by another, and another, breaking the pattern, breaking the rhythm. And that was what made Daniel sit up, because Rex did not break pattern without reason. Not ever, and the Marine in him recognized that change faster than the man did. He swung his legs off the bed, boots already beside him, and this time there was no hesitation, no denial left to hold. On to. Only a quiet urgency that pushed him forward as he crossed the room, grabbed a flashlight from the counter, and stepped toward the back door where Rex stood rigid, tail straight, eyes locked not just on the yard but beyond it, as if whatever he sensed had drawn nearer to the house itself. The door opened, and the cold hit harder tonight, sharper, cutting through the fabric of his jacket as he stepped out, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the darkness in a narrow line, catching particles of dust and moisture in the air, making the night feel thicker, almost visible. And Rex moved ahead immediately, not stopping at the edge of the porch this time, not pausing at the invisible boundary, but continuing forward with purpose, guiding rather than waiting. Daniel followed, his boots pressing deeper into the ground, and he could feel it now with every step, the subtle give beneath the surface, the unevenness that did not belong to untouched land. And when they reached the same patch of earth, Rex did not bark again. Instead, he began to circle it slowly, nose low, tracing a path that tightened with each pass, until he stopped dead at the center and looked back at Daniel, holding his gaze in a way that felt almost human, almost deliberate, like he was saying, "This is it. This is where you need to look." Daniel crouched down, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand as the beam passed over the ground, revealing more than it had the night before, small details that had been invisible until now, faint marks, shallow impressions, the kind left by something placed and then covered, not naturally formed, not random. And his chest tightened as the realization began to take shape, slow and heavy, because this was no longer just instinct, no longer just a dog reacting to the wild. This was a message, repeated night after night, until it could no longer be ignored. He pressed his palm against the soil, feeling the cool dampness seep into his skin, and for a brief moment he closed his eyes, drawing in a breath that tasted of earth and pine and something else, something older, something hidden. And when he opened them again, the doubt that had carried him through the first 2 nights was gone, replaced by something quieter but far more dangerous. Belief. Rex let out a single, low sound, softer now, almost patient, as if he had done his part and was waiting for Daniel to do his. And in that moment, standing in the middle of a dark Montana yard under a sky that offered no answers, Daniel Hayes understood something he had not allowed himself to admit since the war, that sometimes the truth does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes in signals, in patterns, in quiet warnings repeated until you are ready to listen. And tonight, for the first time, he finally was. Daniel did not stand up right away. He stayed there on his knees with his hand pressed against the soil, feeling the quiet dampness seep into his skin as if the ground itself was trying to speak in a language too subtle for words. And for a long moment, neither he nor Rex moved, the night stretching around them in a stillness that felt heavier than silence, until finally Daniel exhaled slowly and reached for the flashlight again, angling the beam closer to the surface, narrowing his focus the way he'd been trained to do when details mattered more than distance. The light revealed more now that he was looking for it, not just the uneven texture but faint edges, slight shifts in color where the dirt had been turned and settled again, and just beneath the top layer, something else, something that did not belong to earth or stone, a thin line, barely visible like fabric or material pressed flat and hidden from casual sight. His pulse tightened, steady but stronger now. Not panic, not fear, but that familiar readiness that came when uncertainty turned into something actionable, and he brushed the surface lightly with his fingers, careful, controlled, moving the dirt aside in small motions until the shape became clearer, not large, not obvious, but deliberate, placed, concealed. Rex lowered himself beside the spot, not lying down, not relaxing, but anchoring himself there, his chest close to the ground, his breathing slow but focused. And he let out a quiet sound again, softer this time, almost encouraging, as if he understood that the moment had shifted from warning to discovery. Daniel glanced at him briefly, and there was something in that look, something unspoken that carried years of trust built in places where mistakes cost more than sleep. In it, steadied him in a way nothing else could. He set the flashlight down on the ground so the beam held steady over the spot, then leaned forward, using both hands now, moving the soil aside with more purpose, not digging yet, just uncovering, revealing, and with each pass, the shape beneath grew more defined, edges forming where there had only been suggestion before. It was not natural, that much was certain now, not roots, not rock, but something placed here by intention, something meant to stay hidden, and the realization settled in slowly, heavier with each second, because this was no longer about a restless dog or a quiet yard. This was about something that had been put here, something that did not belong to the land. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a faint sound through the trees, distant, almost too soft to notice, and Daniel paused, his hand still, his head tilting just enough to listen, because there was again, not loud, not clear, but present, a faint irregular tapping, like something small brushing against wood or earth from beneath, so subtle it could have been dismissed if he had not already been paying attention, if Rex had not already told him where to look. Rex's ears lifted immediately, his body tightening just enough to confirm what Daniel had heard. And the dog did not bark this time. He did not need to, because the signal had changed. The message had moved from warning to confirmation, and Daniel felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the cold air, because whatever was beneath the ground was not still, it was not silent. It was there, present in a way that turned the quiet Montana night into something else entirely. He swallowed hard, his breath visible in the beam of the flashlight, and for a brief second, the world narrowed to that single patch of disturbed earth, to the faint sound that came and went like a fragile echo, and to the dog beside him who had refused to let it be ignored. And Daniel Hayes understood, with a clarity that left no room for doubt, that whatever truth Rex had been pointing to all along, it was no longer hidden. It was waiting just beneath his hands. Daniel did not hesitate anymore. The moment for doubt had already passed somewhere between the second night and now, and whatever lay beneath the ground had made itself known in the only way it could, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. So he leaned forward again, this time with intention, his hands moving faster but still controlled, clearing away the loose soil layer by layer until the surface beneath revealed itself more clearly under the beam of the flashlight. A flat structure, man-made, not large, maybe 3 feet across, its edges faint but distinct, covered by just enough earth to disappear in daylight, but not enough to fool a nose trained for truth. The faint tapping came again, softer now, irregular, like it was fading or struggling to hold on, and Daniel's chest tightened as urgency replaced caution, his breath quickening in the cold air as he pushed more dirt aside, exposing what looked like the top of a weathered wooden panel or crate, its surface worn but intact, small gaps along the edges where the soil had not fully sealed it, and from those gaps, that same sound, faint, fragile, but unmistakably real. Rex shifted closer, pressing his body low against the ground, his ears angled forward, his eyes never leaving the spot, And for the first time since this began, he did not make a sound at all, as if silence now mattered more than warning, as if whatever was beneath could hear them just as clearly as they could sense it. Daniel reached for the shovel, lying a few feet away, his fingers tightening around the handle as he positioned it carefully at the edge of the wooden surface, not striking, not forcing, but prying gently, lifting the soil packed around it with deliberate pressure, working methodically the way he had been trained in situations where precision mattered more than speed, even as every instinct inside him urged him to move faster. The wood shifted slightly under the pressure, a subtle give that sent a jolt through him. Confirmation that it was not part of the land, not something fixed or rooted, but something placed, something that could be opened. He paused for a fraction of a second, listening again, and there was, softer now but still present, a faint series of taps, uneven, like someone reaching out with the last of their strength, and the realization settled fully into place, not as a shock, but as a quiet certainty that made everything else fall away. Rex's head lowered even further, his nose almost touching the edge of the wood, his breathing slow and steady, as if he was holding the moment together, anchoring it so it would not slip away, and Daniel felt that same steadiness pass into his own hands, grounding him, focusing him. He adjusted his grip, slid the shovel under the loosened edge, and applied just enough force to lift, the wood creaking softly as it separated from the soil. Not breaking, not splintering, just shifting enough to create a narrow opening. And from that opening, the sound changed, no longer muffled by layers of dirt, but clearer now, fragile but unmistakable, a presence that had been hidden and was now just within reach. The cold air seemed to still around them, the wind fading into the background as if the night itself had stepped back to make room for what was happening. And Daniel Hayes leaned closer, his heart steady but heavy, knowing that whatever he was about to uncover had been waiting for him long before he ever picked up the shovel, waiting through 5 nights of warnings, through every bark he had tried to ignore, and now, finally, it was no longer hidden, it was right there, beneath his hands, asking to be seen. The gap widened just enough of the night air to slip inside, and with it, the sound became clearer, no longer a distant suggestion, but something unmistakably real, fragile, uneven, like someone trying to be heard without the strength to make it loud. And Daniel felt his breath catch in his chest as he lowered himself closer to the opening, one hand steadying the edge of the wood while the other adjusted the flashlight so the beam cut directly into the narrow space beneath. The light revealed darkness first, thick and close, but then movement, slight, almost imperceptible, and a shape that shifted just enough to confirm what his mind had already begun to accept but had not yet fully allowed. And for a second, everything inside him went still, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding settling into place. Rex remained completely silent beside him, his body pressed low, his head angled toward the opening, his ears tuned to every small sound, and in that silence, Daniel could feel the dog's focus like a steady force, holding the moment. Together, refusing to let it slip into doubt or hesitation. He moved the shovel aside, setting it down carefully so it would not disturb the fragile structure, and instead used both hands to clear more of the surrounding soil, widening the space with deliberate care, his fingers working through the cold dirt, pulling it away inch by inch until the top of the wooden surface was more exposed, enough to allow him to lift it further without forcing it. The wood shifted again, a soft creak breaking through the stillness, and Daniel paused, listening because the sound beneath responded, faint but present, a small movement, a subtle tapping that seemed to reach upward toward the opening. And it was that response that pushed him forward, that removed the last trace of hesitation from his actions. He adjusted his grip along the edge and lifted carefully, slow enough to avoid sudden movement, steady enough to keep control. And as the opening widened, the air beneath seemed to change, carrying a faint warmth compared to the cold night above, and with it that same fragile sound, clearer now, closer, no longer hidden by layers of earth. The beam of the flashlight followed the movement, illuminating more of the space below, enough to reveal that what lay beneath was not empty, not forgotten, but occupied, present in a way that turned the quiet yard into something entirely different, something that demanded attention, demanded response. Daniel swallowed, his throat dry despite the cold. And for a brief moment, he closed his eyes, grounding himself in the familiar discipline that had carried him through worse, through moments where clarity mattered more than emotion. And when he opened them again, his focus sharpened, his movements more precise, more certain. Rex shifted slightly, just enough to press closer, his presence steady and unwavering. And Daniel reached down carefully into the opening, not rushing, not forcing, but extending his hand toward the space below, guided by sound, by movement, by the quiet insistence that had led them here in the first place. The night held around them, still and watchful, as if everything beyond that small circle of light had stepped back to witness what would happen next. And Daniel Hayes understood, with a clarity that left no room for doubt, that this was the moment the signals had been leading to, the moment where instinct, trust, and truth met in a single place beneath his hands, and whatever he touched next would change everything that came after. Daniel's hand hovered for only a fraction of a second before it moved forward, guided not by sight alone, but by the faint, uneven sound rising from below. And when his fingers finally made contact, it was not with cold wood or empty space, but with something warm, fragile, and unmistakably alive, and the realization struck him with a quiet force that steadied rather than startled, because everything had been leading to this. Every bark, every restless night, every moment he had almost ignored. The movement beneath his hand responded immediately, small and weak but present, and Daniel's grip shifted instinctively, careful, controlled, as he reached deeper into the narrow opening, widening it just enough with his other hand to allow space. The wood creaking softly as it gave way another inch, then another, until the shape below became clearer in the beam of the flashlight. It was a person, not fully visible yet, not fully free, but there alive in the confined space beneath the ground, their presence confirmed not by sight alone, but by the faint motion, the quiet tapping that had called out through layers of soil night after night, until someone finally listened. Rex remained pressed low beside the opening, his body still, his eyes fixed, and for the first time since this began, there was no tension in him, no urgency, only a steady focus that felt almost like relief, as if the message had been delivered and understood. Daniel adjusted his position, lowering himself further, bracing one knee against the ground as he carefully cleared more dirt from the edges, working faster now, but without losing control, every movement measured to avoid collapse, to avoid harm, to create space where there had been none. The cold air shifted again as the opening widened, and the faint sound grew clearer, not louder, but more defined, like a signal finally reaching its destination. And Daniel spoke then, his voice low, steady, not loud enough to break the fragile balance of the moment, but clear enough to carry downward into the space below, a simple reassurance, the kind he had used before in places where fear needed to be met with calm, where presence mattered more than words. He continued clearing, hands moving through dirt and loose soil, pulling it away, making room, until at last there was enough space to reach fully inside, enough space to guide, to lift, to help. And when he did, his movements were careful, deliberate, every motion controlled, every second grounded in the discipline that had once kept him alive and now guided him here. The night seemed to hold still around them, the wind fading into the background, the trees standing silent as if bearing witness, and Rex shifted just slightly closer, his presence unwavering, his breathing slow, and even a quiet anchor beside the chaos that could have been, but was not, because this moment was not about panic, not about fear. It was about response, about answering something that had refused to be ignored. Daniel Hayes leaned back slowly, guiding what he had found upward into the open air, out of the confined darkness and into the faint glow of the flashlight. And as the shape emerged fully into view, the truth settled into place with a clarity that left no room for doubt, not terrifying the way he had once imagined, but profound in a quieter, deeper way, because it was not just about what had been hidden beneath the ground. It was about the fact that it had not been alone, not forgotten, not lost because a dog had listened, had stayed, had refused to walk away, and in doing so had changed the outcome of this night entirely. The moment the weight shifted fully into his arms, Daniel felt it, not just the physical presence of the person he had pulled from beneath the earth, but the quiet, undeniable truth of what had nearly been lost, and he steadied himself as he guided them onto the ground beside the opening, careful, deliberate. Every movement measured so nothing was rushed, nothing was forced, because this was no longer about discovery. It was about care, about preserving what had been found. The cold air wrapped around them both, but it felt different now, less sharp, less distant, as if the night itself had softened in response to what had just happened, and Daniel adjusted his jacket without thinking, placing it gently around the person, his hands steady, his breath controlled, the same calm he had learned long ago returning not as memory, but as instinct. Rex moved closer then, not abruptly, not urgently, but with quiet purpose, his steps slow, his posture relaxed for the first time in days, and he lowered himself beside them, his head resting near the edge of Daniel's arm, his amber eyes watching not for danger now, but for confirmation, for completion. And when the faint movement beneath the jacket continued, when the fragile presence remained steady, something in Rex finally eased, something that had been held tight since the first night, breaking free without a sound. Daniel sat back slightly, his knees pressing into the damp ground, his hands resting for a moment as he took in the stillness around them, the trees standing tall and silent, the faint rustle of wind returning like a distant memory, and he realized how quiet it had become, how different this silence felt compared to the nights before, because it was no longer empty, no longer filled with unanswered signals. It was complete. He looked at Rex then, really looked, and there was something in that moment that did not need words, something that stretched beyond commands and training and into something simpler, deeper, the kind of trust that is built not in comfort, but in moments where one chooses to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Rex blinked slowly, his breathing calm, his body finally at rest, and Daniel reached out, his hand finding the familiar space behind the dog's ear, fingers pressing gently into the thick fur, grounding himself in something real, something constant. No words were spoken, none were needed, because everything that mattered had already been said in the nights leading up to this one, in every bark that had refused to be ignored, in every moment of persistence that had led them here. The opening in the ground remained behind them, quiet now, no longer a place of hidden signals, but of revealed truth, and Daniel knew it would not be left as it was, that there would be calls made, help brought, the right steps taken, but for this moment, none of that mattered yet, because what mattered was that something had been heard, that something had been answered. Rex let out a slow breath, his body settling fully against the earth, and for the first time since it began, he did not watch the darkness, he did not listen for what might come next, he simply stayed present in the quiet, as if the work he had carried in silence was finally done, and Daniel Hayes, sitting there under a fading Montana night, understood with a clarity that would stay with him long after the ground was filled and the world moved on, that sometimes the smallest signal, the one that refuses to fade, is the one that saves everything. In a quiet rural town where the nights stretch long and heavy, a battle-worn Marine begins to notice something he cannot explain as his loyal German shepherd refuses to stop barking at the same exact time every night, drawing him into a mystery buried beneath the silence of his own backyard. And what starts as irritation slowly becomes a pattern, then a warning, and finally a truth too real to ignore. This deeply emotional entry into animal stories captures the unbreakable bond between a Marine and his dog, where instinct speaks louder than logic and loyalty refuses to fade even when ignored, as the German shepherd senses something hidden beneath the earth and continues to signal night after night until the Marine chooses to listen, revealing a powerful narrative that blends suspense, trust, and quiet heroism. Unlike typical animal stories, this cinematic journey unfolds through subtle clues, repeated signals, and a growing sense of unease that transforms into action, highlighting how animals often perceive what humans overlook, and how faith in that bond can lead to life-changing outcomes. The Marine, shaped by discipline and past experience, slowly reconnects with the instincts he once trusted in the field, while the German Shepherd remains unwavering, grounded, and focused, embodying the essence of loyalty that defines the most compelling animal stories. As the truth emerges from beneath the surface, the story does not rely on spectacle, but instead on emotional depth, atmosphere, and the quiet miracle of being heard in time, making it a standout among animal stories that emphasize connection over chaos. Through careful pacing and immersive storytelling, this narrative invites viewers into a world where silence carries meaning, where signals repeat until they are understood, and where one dog's refusal to give up becomes the turning point that changes everything, reinforcing why stories like this continue to resonate so strongly within the world of animal stories. Character 1. White male U.S. Marine, mid-30s, rugged face, short brown hair, light stubble, intense eyes, front view, realistic lighting, worn military jacket, standing still, no cartoon, no. Cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, cinematic realism, natural skin texture, sharp focus. Character 2. Full-body German Shepherd dog, adult, sable coat, black and tan fur, alert ears, strong athletic build, standing still, front view, intense amber eyes, realistic lighting, natural texture, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, sharp focus detail.